I hope everyone is keeping safe. I want to take this opportunity to welcome all my students and guests. Some of them are from outside the US, some of them are from India, some of them are from Germany. I want to thank our dean and my department chair. I think they are here somewhere. Now, it is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Mr. Jeremy King. Jeremy is the Senior Vice President and Head of Engineering at Pinterest. He leads the entire engineering team to build deeply technical products and machine learning systems at Pinterest. Over the years, he has held several leadership positions in the world's largest organizations. As a Chief Technology Officer at Walmart, Jeremy led the digital transformation of the company, including customer technology, merchant technology, and supply chain technology that covered all Walmart US stores, Walmart labs, and e-commerce. And if I might add, you'll notice that the only real competition to Amazon is Walmart. Prior to that, Jeremy was an Executive Vice President of Technology at LiveOps and Vice President of Engineering and Software Development at eBay. Above all, Jeremy holds a bachelor's degree in information technology from guess where? Right here, San Jose State University. He's a kind friend, and even with his busy schedule, has always been extremely generous with his time for our students. And true to his name, King, Jeremy has served as a true leader, a role model, and a mentor for our students, and for me personally. Now, I can go for a whole hour, but I'm sure you want to hear from him instead. If you have questions, please post them on the chat window, and I will direct them to him. Please welcome Jeremy. Jeremy, all yours. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the nice and kind intro. It is a pleasure to come back to San Jose State. I talk to the dean and a number of people all the time about what I can do to help contribute back to San Jose State. And when I was sitting in your shoes, I never would have guessed I was going to do that. But you all sitting out there can think that someday you should be thinking about giving back to your university or to your university. These kind of programs are invaluable to students. So I appreciate you making the time. Both of my kids are in college, and I asked them last night, what I could do to make this Zoom meeting more interactive and more fun. And much to my chagrin, they said I have no chance of making it interactive or fun. So I'm sorry that we're in this Zoom experience, and I'd much rather be standing in front of you, but I'll do my best to make it a great experience. And again, happy to rip through the material pretty quick and then leave lots of time for questions across any of the topics we cover today. So a couple of things, just a quick background. If you haven't looked at my LinkedIn or haven't heard what I've been up to, I've been around Silicon Valley a while. I grew up in rural North Carolina and moved luckily into Silicon Valley when I was fairly young. My dad worked for IBM and my mom was an artist. And I got lucky enough to grow up in the Valley right when the internet was just beginning. So, and frankly, I was also lucky. I was also working at a networking company at the time. So Synoptics/Bay Networks was really the main competition to Cisco at the time. And they were really going against ATM technology versus regular Ethernet, and Ethernet won in the end, but that's how it is. I was able to not only discover the World Wide Web there, but also I oftentimes say that my MBA was largely there because I worked on a company-wide SAP project for 2 years into my 9-year experience there. And it really helped me understand the inner workings of the business, not only from the systems view, but how sales integrated with finance and integrated with manufacturing and planning and that sort of thing. And it really was a wonderful experience there. I also got to meet my long-term mentor, Maynard Webb, who was the CIO at the time, and he and I are dear friends to this day. I did say that I stayed a little bit too long. I can talk about that history a little bit later. As the internet was booming, I should have jumped out maybe a year, even 2 years earlier before the internet crash came along. But I waited a little too long. My next experience, I joined as the first engineer, the 5th employee of the company called Patopia. and right in 99, 2000, and frankly built the first version of it from scratch with just a few engineers. You know, I like to say that we raised $126 million. We filed to go public and instead went bankrupt. So we, again, another MBA type experience where you not only go through the entire going public capabilities, but also, you know, go to a fire sale and asset sale. And we sold the assets to Petco, and I stayed on to transition the website. And it is now, it still is Petco's online experience, and many of the team members still work in San Diego at Petco. Luckily, my mentor had left Synoptics Bay Networks and had landed at eBay, and Maynard was calling me about joining eBay at the time. This was a great experience. eBay at the time was the #1 you know, website for e-commerce in the world, and Amazon was still just growing up. And you could argue that from a business model perspective, we failed, but this is where I really learned how to scale. It was really one of the first websites besides sort of Yahoo and the sort of portals that really did e-commerce and transactions at scale. And so I learned a lot about scaling. I grew my teams. When I first joined, I was the first member of the architecture team. I was the head of architecture. And when I left, I was running about 3,000 people in the org. Acquired a ton of companies, integrated them, including things like PayPal and Skype, which you guys have all heard about, and then a dozen smaller companies as well. My mentor, again, Maynard, after 7 years, I left to go to another startup called LiveOps. I was really enamored by crowdsourcing. Everybody knows what it is now when you talk about the gig economy and that sort of thing. But back in the day, nobody knew what it was. And I thought we were on the beginning of a real big trend. And it turned out we were too early. And the trend was still risky for investors. And there's still arguments about whether you know, people on the gig economy should be classified as employees or contractors. But it was really a threat to the business. But it was an enterprise software company, so not only did I get to learn a little bit about enterprise software, but also about how to keep systems up at 5 nines, and really how to architect systems at that type of scale. We never did achieve 5 nines, but we got 4.5 nines several times. 5 nines is an incredibly hard thing to achieve at a scale. And then, of course, enterprise software has a sales team. And so I actually was able to learn, you know, the sales process and how to work with customers, and did a lot of selling myself. And then I got this crazy call from Walmart, Fortune 1, the biggest company in the world. And where I thought I would be, you know, I told the recruiter that, you know, if I got to talk to the CEO, that I would take the interview. Because at the time, you know, nobody knew what was going on with Walmart, and Walmart e-commerce didn't really exist. They had ignored it for 10 years. And so I luckily got there and was able to create Walmart Labs and sort of rebuild the internet presence of Walmart for 8 years. It was a wonderful experience. I thought I would be there 6 months or 5 years, and it turned out I was there nearly 8 years. So, and again, obviously the biggest company in the world, but also got to learn, you know, physical transportation of goods, and, you know, worked out of a digital experience. So since then, I've been at Pinterest. I've been there almost exactly 1 year. It was about 2 weeks ago. I was there 1 year, and I wrote a document about, you know, the things that I learned about being at a startup before the largest company in the world, and being at Pinterest, which is a startup after the largest company in the world. So I'll rip through these. Most of this is really about you know, really about lessons for CTOs about how to create a digital company, even if your company isn't digital. Couple things first, though. Pinterest. Hopefully, many of you know what Pinterest is. Our mission is to bring everyone the inspiration to create a life they love. Now more than ever, people are using it to get inspired every day. And when they want to get off social media and figure out what they want to do with their life, they're using Pinterest more, and I'll talk a little bit about that. We're big. You know, we passed Twitter and Snap this last year in active number of active users. Greater than 50% of users outside the US, 80+% on mobile. You know, our site is huge, 175 billion pins, 3 billion boards, and growing like crazy. 350 active monthly users. Personally, I use Pinterest nearly every day. We just launched a couple of things that help it do shopping. I do a lot of home automation work. I'm building a wine cellar. I'm kind of a builder maker in my own experience. I got a lot of projects always going on. But we also have made sure that we can use it for a lot more things. So we launched the Today tab relatively recently, and you can imagine it's filled with things like how do I create a great home office or work from home, or how do I do yoga or cook. A lot of people are in this experience for the very first time and using Pinterest for all these inspirations. We're a pretty well-known brand in 2018. We were pretty well-known, recognized, number 3, and we're still way up there. From a monetary standpoint, I'll talk a little bit about how we make money. It's a traditional advertising company, but I thought it'd be pretty easy to walk through this. So the way we think about it is weekly active users, so WAU, and then the number of active users that come to the site and the number of impressions they see. In our case, the number of pins they see, divided by the weekly active users times the number of ads that we're able to show on the impressions gives us CPM, effective CPM, and that gives us money. So in the end, so our goals, essentially, we want to grow the number of weekly active users. We want, when people come to Pinterest, we want to show them beautiful experiences that are relevant. So we want to increase engagement. And then we want to be very careful between how many ads you see and the number of impressions you see. And so that's ad load, the number of ads you see compared to the number of organic experiences. And then, of course, the advertisers want to get value out of it. So the effective CPM is effectively how much they pay and how many times their ad actually gets seen by the customer. So before we jump to talk about a little bit about the new normal, or the abnormal, as I like to say, I'll show you a few charts that I grabbed around the internet and a couple of emails. I took most of the metrics on. But we're seeing things like this across the board, across whether it's financials, usage, the number of users that are coming on board, EPS and change over 10 years, what's happening with the stock market, and it's just amazing. I mean, we are in an abnormal time right now. Plan is incredibly hard. I don't know if you've seen, work on things like AWS and Microsoft are having a hard time just keeping up the data center space. Some companies are growing, 20 to 50 to 100%. Other companies are falling off the face of the earth. So it's a very abnormal time right now. And from an IT perspective, you would like to make things boring and have a lot more predictability, but right now that's just not happening on all the activity going on. I grabbed some statistics from this week. If you haven't seen, you're seeing winners and losers across the board. Overall sales of retail have dropped almost 9%, biggest dip in the history of sales. But there are winners. Health and personal care and groceries are growing pretty respectively, but you get huge categories that are dropping like crazy. Clothing sales, home furniture are dropping massively across the board. So people are having to react to this. And when you take a look at things like Uber and Lyft, GM, I mean, Uber's, this is from this morning, Uber's gross bookings in recent weeks, 80% below a year ago, 75% on Lyft. It's amazing how fast these companies are having to adjust. And you see Uber and Lyft, changing their strategy to home deliveries instead of ride sharing. And frankly, when you read the paper, the question is, how long can Airbnb, Uber, and Lyft even survive in an environment like this? So they're going to adjust dramatically. And my friends that work at these companies are sort of frantically moving to transform their businesses. Obviously, Netflix and other companies are jumping. Netflix is really interesting because not only they've increased their overall viewership, of course, but they actually generated profits for the first time. It's really an accident that happened, because they effectively have stopped developing their own TV series. And so as a result, they're not spending a lot of money. So they're actually generating a profit for the first time. But the question is, are these really things that are going to help them survive long term? And then, when it comes to budgeting, I really wanted to talk about this because I think a lot of you are getting close to graduation and are nervous about what's happening in the environment. When you look at IT and engineering in particular, this I thought was great. It was a Mayfield CXO discussion, and really what they're showing is, a majority of a small majority of companies right now are effectively saying that they're not impacting, or they're actually increasing their budget. So short-lived means that they've kind of what Pinterest is doing is that we've sort of slowed, as like Google has said as well. We're making sure that every headcount that we hire is exactly the right headcount, and we're being much more deliberate about the headcount we're bringing on. But people are really investing in technology that helps people with elastic workforce. How do I get to cloud migration? How do I digitally optimize my workforce? So they are continuing to invest, and frankly, as we've invested in Pinterest, and I've seen my cohorts, my CTO friends around the world, they've really either not invested in engineering, but slowed in other areas, SG&A and even sales, because sales activity is really unpredictable right now. And so I really see investments in the technology space right now not really slowing down, or going to be relatively short-lived. The decreases, of course, are coming in places like travel and airlines, and some of these Uber and Lyft obviously aren't hiring right now. But I do think these are things that will come back relatively quickly. I also grabbed this from this morning. We just did a pulse survey, and one of the questions we asked is, are we able to support you when you're working from home? And most people inside the company are feeling supported. The number one complaint and the problems that people are having is if you have small children, for example, 2 working parents and 2 small children is a disaster, right? You have to invest in childcare and in entertainment of your children. And while you're trying to juggle an experience, and companies like Pinterest and others are doing things like not really work furloughs, but they're sort of saying, hey, you can go to part-time for a while, or you can take a sabbatical per se, in order to get through this time. And you see a lot of companies going through. And last on this, the question was, how do we get out of this? Ron Sugar is a very well-known board member. He's on the board of several large companies, as you can see here. And really what's happening right now is he breaks it down into 3 things. Number one, every company right now is in triage. Like, how do we figure out how to make sure our employees are healthy and they're able to be as productive as possible? But also companies are essentially trying to make sure they're as liquid as possible so that they can invest in places that make sense. And so there's lots of scrambling going on right now. We're going through right next, we'll go through a period of transition, and this is probably going to be an 18-month cycle. And it frankly is that, how do we get people back to work? And then what happens if we get a lot of litigation? Say you go back to work and somebody gets COVID, are you going to get sued and things like that? And of course, there'll be lots of companies that are sort of unstable right now. And so there might be an increased number of acquisitions and mergers, and the worry about activists sort of trying to take advantage of this situation. And last, this new abnormal discussion. If you Nit and I think you and I were talking about this. When you look through history, every catastrophe that there was followed by a very long period of rapid innovation. And so again, I think while it might be a little bit disconcerting right now, I think the opportunity for engineers and folks around the world to innovate out of this is going to be extremely high. So I'll go really quick on this. 7 tips for how to create a corporate startup. This is a deck that I've used a couple of times for CEOs and how to build a technology company inside your company, even if you're not a technology company. was sort of inspired by this article and my work at Walmart. Walmart is, you know, I would qualify as not a technology company. Obviously, they're a retailer, but we need to be a technology company. And when I was there, the goal was to effectively build a startup technology company inside the world's largest company. And this article was just a few weeks ago about how Wells Fargo is struggling to stay current with aging systems across the board. Every company in the end is going to be a technology company. And again, for those of you studying IT, I think there's a lot of opportunity across the board. So the recommendations I give, of course, are based on what I had to do at Walmart. And when I look at environment, even the basic capabilities of building a tech team weren't in place. Engineers were largely separated into different buildings. They really, you know, engaged in sort of the day-to-day business working. They didn't have the latest and greatest software. They were on, you know, legacy laptops and computer systems. And, you know, we never really got the capabilities that we all expect today. You expect to use the Google Suite and, you know, Slack and Zoom and that sort of thing. All these things, you know, have to be built into the base before you can even start building an engineering culture. I put in feedback here too. As many of you, I'm sure, have asked your professors over the last couple of weeks, how am I doing? You know, this sort of peer-to-peer environment has made the corporate world a lot more susceptible to sort of making sure we're giving feedback pretty regularly. And most corporations are sort of on an annual cycle and need to be changed pretty dramatically. Number two, after you get the environment in place, you have to start building the culture. And, you know, engineers don't want to work on a year-long or 2-year-long products anymore. We really want to do iteration, all the things that you're learning in your IT classes about product management and the ability to move rapidly with iteration. I'll talk a little bit about experimentation later, but I talk about making sure that we're using things like GitHub and the tools that are in place there. But also part of the reason GitHub and the tool set's important is because inner sourcing, it's interesting. Like when I first got to Walmart, if somebody checked in a piece of code, if somebody went into the code repository and looked at your code and said, hey, there's a bug in your code, you know, and I made a fix for it, there'd be a lot of territorial, like, hey, why are you touching my code? Why are you looking at my stuff? What I found at Pinterest is somebody actually sees a bug in the code, they'll actually open the repository, you know, oftentimes will make the fix, say, hey, I found this, made the fix, check it in and submit it for code review. And what they get back from the other engineer is thank you, right? It's a very different experience where you have built a culture of collaboration across the board. So you want to look for that when you're looking at your next company. Number three, and this is almost the key to it all, and it's really about access to data. Lots of companies don't have modern tooling, and they don't really train people when you come on board where the data is. It's very common inside of Pinterest for somebody to ask a question, and in the meeting, somebody will flip open the laptop, run a query, and get the answer right there in the meeting. 63% of employees, that's 100, all the employees, including HR and you know, the sales team and business ops and all that, have access to our big data system, and they've run a query in the last 60 days. So making sure all of our data is in the system and there's access to it. This is why, you know, I tell people across the board, you should be learning SQL and how to use Excel and all these sorts of things, even if you're in you know, a business discipline, because this access to data is super important. No matter what organization you're in, whether you're in HR or finance or sales, all this access to data is really the important part of the whole thing. And the last bullet here is about openness. Lots of companies haven't really done the work to make the available to their employee base. And oftentimes that's hidden behind sort of like, well, this data is really secure. You don't want people to have access to it. There's lots of well-known techniques to secure data and to take out personal PII or personally identifiable information out so that you can make it safe for your company to have access to your data. Tip number 4 is about experimentation. This is really about instrumenting your platform so that you can run lots of A/B tests. Companies like Airbnb and Bookings.com are really famous for this. Pinterest, a wonderful experimentation platform. I built this into the Walmart platform in retrospective, which was extremely hard to do. When at Walmart, we finally got to the point where we could run about 100 tests a month. Pinterest, we're running about, 200, 300 tests at a time. So, so building an experimentation is really important. And again, it has to do with instrumentation of your code base from the beginning, but also how do you segment users? And again, making sure that it's open so anybody can run an experiment. This is an example of the dashboards that we show here. And the part of the reason I have this is because in some cases it actually may show blue in this case is actually a positive and red's a negative. This makes sure that we don't have experimentation bias where people are only looking at, in this case, a pin reaction, is a positive experience. But what we're seeing is people aren't sharing pins as often in this particular experiment. So you need to make sure you're instrumented across the board. If you want a good book on this, Experimentation Works just came out. Stephen Tomke, I've met with a number of times. He just finished a book, and it's an awesome read if you're interested in the space. Tip number 5 is really a management structure. It's about risk. It's about how you set up your corporate structure. The building blocks that are important are the things I talked about: environment and culture and data and experimentation. But it really is about how to set your organization up so that you have a few people that are in charge of making decisions. The number of people that you have in a meeting or in a decision making is inversely proportional to risk. So if you only have 2 people that have to decide, it's easy to take a risk. If you have 10 people, then it's hard. So Walmart did a number of things, not only building Walmart Labs, but also we bought and integrated companies like Jet.com and Flipkart to continue the innovation engine. And even though we did those things, we also had an innovation team that focused on things that were more than 3 years out from the current platform. We call that store number 8. But you should be looking for those inside your company or in future companies. Companies typically have research areas that continue to look at things that are more than 3+ years out. There's a long story about how Walmart Labs originally was that and then became the core part of the platform. And then we had to create store number 8. It's about a 3-year cycle that you have to sort of rebuild these innovation teams. And ownership, I put in here, DRI is the Apple's famous discussion, directly responsible individual. RACI is a well-known model for how to make decisions, and there's another one called CLAM. It doesn't really matter which platform you use, but you should be setting these things up so it's really clear for a company like who actually can make these decisions, and that's a key part of the whole thing. Number 6 is one of my favorites, transparency. Inside, when I was at Walmart, I had about 10,000 people working for me. And in less than 30 seconds, I could find out what any engineer in my company was working on, the week before and what she will be working on, a week later. And it was because we put instrumentation in, and it was super important for me to understand where all the money was being spent before I would ask for another dollar for the organization. So setting up teams properly, making sure that we're budgeting, making sure that we're integrating this in prioritization. Oftentimes I would get like, hey, how can we have 62 people on the platform team? Why don't we put more on the performance team? And without this information, it's really hard to prioritize and strategize on this. We built our own tools internally. This is actually a Google Sheet. We're about to blow up Google Sheets. We're over 1,000 people in my team now. So we have to get a new tool. We're looking at Jira, of course, and a number of other tools that I think you guys are learning in your IT classes. And then last but not least is really about hygiene. When I first joined at Pinterest, we were talking about technical debt. Technical debt is essentially legacy platforms or systems that are no longer owned by an engineer, or things that are out of date, out of compliance, that sort of thing. And I laugh that that Pinterest was, I was I came from Walmart, which is a 50-year-old company. We're still running things on HPUX and AIX and mainframes. And so when it came to Pinterest, it's 100% in AWS and in the cloud. But there still technically is, tech debt inside of Pinterest. And part of the reason tech debt happens is because you get your eye off the ball. If you're not focusing on hygiene, 20% time is a famous thing that Google talks about, is like any engineer can take 20% of their time to innovate. My 20% time is hygiene time. If you're not spending at least 20% of your time on making sure that your environment is stable and current and secure and performant, then you're going to end up a year from now in a really bad place where you have to invest hugely in this. The other thing I also tell CTOs is that you really have to reward and celebrate this work. Everybody loves shipping a new product that customers can see, or some update to data platforms or to that sort of thing. This type of reward, the CTO in particular, has to be it has to be the person that's rewarded and celebrating this type of work, so that it keeps going on. So that's really it for this. I have a million other stories about how my career trajectory happened, the difference between, data centers that you own and AWS type environments, and I'd be happy to get into any of those questions. I think, Newton, we got to 35 minutes, so I'd be happy to open it up to questions right now if you like.
Yeah, so I think I already got the first question. Basically, majority of the people over here are MIS students, and for obvious reasons, they are very worried about the job market. Some of them will be graduating this semester, some of them will be graduating next semester. So they're concerned about what does the future hold for them, and how can they stand out given the current environment.
Yeah, can you still hear me? Let me try and stop sharing so you can see me better. Yeah, that's a great question. I think, like I said, I personally believe that the need for both engineers and IT professionals across the board will continue to remain very strong. It might be at different types of companies. A lot of people are joining Airbnb and Ubers of the world, and it might be that you're joining, some of the bigger companies that are have more cash in the bank and are more stable. But as I outlined, especially in IT, and I know a lot of you are in networking, I would love for you guys to go work on at Comcast and fix my internet connectivity issues that I have here. For example, many companies are scrambling to build out remote work capabilities. So those of you that are networking, I would invest a little bit in not only understanding the tooling, but also how it works. I have a few anecdotes, but many of my friends that I went to college with that were in the College of Business also ended up in sales and marketing teams, and they've been telling me that the sales cycles have actually shortened quite a bit because people really don't have a long period of time right now to sort of make a decision on a new VPN solution or what they're going to use for video conferencing. They go in, they sort of, do an evaluation for a week or two, and then they're writing the PO. And so you're actually seeing the acceleration of things like security, software environments. We had to upgrade our VPN hardware, and I think they were done in 2 weeks. We had upgraded our entire VPN system at Pinterest. And so I do think there's lots of places where there will be work. I think over the next month, people are still trying to evaluate sort of where they are in the world, how much cash are they burning, how many customers, are they keeping. Next month it'll shake out. But I remain optimistic that things are going to be okay for IT students.
Another question that we have is, and this is, I think, an important question. How did you find your mentor? How do I find one? And what was the advice that you got from the mentor? And how important is one?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. My mentor is actually a great story. Maynard and I, again, are still pretty good friends today. I figured out later, especially as I became a senior executive in the company, that My mentees are people that are able to tell me in their own words kind of what's going on in the environment. As you grow up in the management chain in particular, but I think across the board, even if you stay on the technical track, you start losing touch of sort of what's happening day to day, sort of what systems need help, what teams are effective, what teams aren't effective, what people think of management, what people think of your hiring and onboarding process. So I found that the way I got my mentor is that he was relying on me, even though he was the CIO, and I had just become, at the time, I think I had just become a project manager, I wasn't even a leader yet. But he would come to me. I was a pretty hard worker. He saw my work ethic, of course, but he would ask me about, a particular team or what I thought of a particular problem. And I was very open and honest with him, and not in a, sort of a mean way, like, hey, you should fire this person or whatever. I would just say, hey, this team's struggling or that team's that. And I realized inside I was pretty naive about what he was asking me. Oftentimes he already knew the answer. And I was just sort of reinforcing places. So I would not, walk up to a leader in your company and say, hey, will you be my mentor? I would understand what their problems are and be a good source for information for them. And then you'll find, that the mentorship relationship typically sort of finds its way into it. I don't even know that Maynard and I ever sort of formally made a mentor-mentee relationship. I have about 6 mentees in my company, and we are a little bit more formal, but there's about another 6 that I go grab lunch with from time to time, just to get their opinion about what's going on. So know what you're doing, have an opinion, and don't complain about your boss, or don't be a complainer, I guess is the other answer. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's an excellent advice. So another question that came was, what is the best career advice? And I think where this is coming from is that you obviously from San Jose State have achieved a lot, and a lot of others, graduates from San Jose State. So what's the difference between somebody getting to your level and somebody, just leading an average career throughout their lives? I mean, what is something that they can do now that will ensure their success?
Typically, the answer I give here is part of the reason I was able to be successful is because I really became the expert. And in this case, I became the expert in basically web platforms. At the time, it was pretty low tech stuff I was doing. Believe it or not, I was doing Netscape Navigator and a shit ton of Perl, actually. Setting up our intranet and getting our internet environment stable. But I became the company's expert in the web. And when I see this across the board, the people that I value and the people that I think accelerate through the company pretty quickly are the ones that become an expert in XYZ system. They're an expert in a technology stack. They're an expert in one important part of the business. The folks that I see that are sort of, I have often called it sort of they're doomed to be a senior manager or a director for the rest of their life, is they jump into management too early. Very few people are the best leaders in the world and can lead any team of any size, even if they don't have the expertise. So if you do a couple years and then jump into management, my guess is that you're going to be, sort of a senior manager or director for the rest of your life, and will oftentimes not get to, sort of the VP or executive level. And that's also true. Again, I want to encourage many of you to stay off of the management track as long as possible. You can always learn later. And most people who have been individual contributors for a really long time also get great experience, sort of understand what good managers are and what bad managers are. And so you are technically getting management experience, but if you can hold off for a really long time, you can always go into leadership later in your career, and I highly recommend that.
Awesome. I have a question about outsourcing. I mean, given the current environment and otherwise, all the restrictions and everything, are we going to see more outsourcing of jobs? Or are we able to find a pool of talent over here?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a tale of two stories here. So at Walmart, when I came in, I found a company that was effectively had outsourced nearly everything. And frankly, it was a disaster. So, and what I would say, and the reason I was able to change that perception was I would use the term, you can't outsource innovation. And what I meant by that was we have to understand what's core to the business that you need to insource and invest in, and what's sort of non-core to the business. And those non-core things you can outsource effectively, but you can't really outsource the core parts of your business. So what I found on the Pinterest side was actually the opposite. 100% of our team was employees. And while that may seem good, there are lots of things that are, not a priority for the company that you put on maintenance mode or something like that, and it becomes a pretty low, not quality job, but it's not an awesome job for an employee to work on a project that's sort of a P3 priority or something that's we call it keep the lights on or on maintenance mode. And so setting up sort of what I call somewhere between under 30% outsourcing is a pretty good thing to do for the company. Now, the other thing I'll say is that at Walmart in particular, we originally had both the CTO and the CIO, the internal tools of the company and the public facing tools of the company in the same organization. And what you had a lot of times was, we were building tools, like we built our own payroll system at Walmart. Now you could argue it's absurd, but at the time there was nobody in the world that could handle a million paychecks a week in the world. So we kind of had to build it, but that's not a core part of Walmart's business. Why did we build our own payroll system, and why do we continue to maintain it years later? And so you have to, and those cases you could technically outsource it, but if you're working for a company like ADP or one of these payroll companies, that's going to be a core part of their business that's going to be insourced. So it really depends on your perspective of sort of what's insourced and outsourced. You take a company like ServiceNow, which I have some issues with, mostly debating on pricing, but they're essentially a company that you're outsourcing a tool set, but they have a very strong, innovative technology team that's right here in Silicon Valley. So it really a perspective. I think companies are becoming, back to my original point about Wells Fargo needs to become a technology company. You're seeing companies realize that they just can't outsource all this stuff to companies around the world.
Awesome. This is an interesting question, actually. So Thomas is asking, be a freak, not a Wikipedia. What do you think about this advice? And I'm guessing it means be experimentational, not a walking encyclopedia.
Yeah, I think, Thomas, it's a great question. And I hope I'm getting this right, but this is the kind of advice that I was saying earlier, that being a freak and being an expert in something, a particular thing, and being the most knowledgeable and being, and frankly, even what we call religious, like, hey, I'm a Java guy, I'm not a C++ guy, that sort of thing, it's totally fine. I think many, back to my point about expertise, that build of expertise, people will go to the freaks and ask them whether this is the right way to do something. I think that's what the question is. I should look up exactly what that means, but I think that's what it means. If I got it wrong, Thomas, feel free to ping again.
I think that's exactly what it means. All right. Another question is value of getting masters. I mean, in this environment, some people will decide to stay back in school, if the jobs are scarce. Is there any value in getting masters, and what's your opinion about getting masters?
The funny thing is, I've told Nitin this previously, that it was only after I left, I kind of had a, I wasn't completely quote unquote poor when I went to San Jose State, but I worked my way through school full time. The last 2 years I worked full time, went to school at night. So technically it took me 5.5 years to get out of college. So I was ready to get out. So I wasn't interested in a master's program at all. What I found though was about 5 years after I joined a company, I started regretting that, because I was like, I really wanted to understand financials more and how the business operations work and that sort of thing. And as I outlined, what I really I did to make up for that is I got myself involved in the global SAP implementation project, and it really helped me understand what you learn in an MBA, which is how does a company work, and how does finance integrate in with sales, and integrate in with sales projections, going to manufacturing, and all the things that you learn there. So I feel like both my experience working on SAP implementation for a $2 billion company, and then going through my startup experience gave me what I needed, but I did regret it many times in my experience. I get that it's expensive. I do think a master's of science, we very much look for on the engineering side. We don't hire that many computer science folks out of the bachelor's. I guess maybe a little less than half we do. But I think we really look for masters of engineering or mathematics or statistics or that sort of thing as very valuable inside of Pinterest.
Awesome. This is again a very interesting question, slightly longer, but I think it goes back to, you'll be able to relate it to Walmart. So the question is from Carlos. It says, it is challenging to convince management to spend time to address technical debt, right? Too much of it can be absolutely detrimental. It is a challenge for Silicon Valley tech companies. And I can imagine how hard it is to convince non-tech companies who are in the process of embracing tech to understand its criticality. Have you found traditional non-tech companies to particularly struggle with this? If so, how do you help them understand how important technical hygiene is?
Yeah, I have a whole slide on this in another deck, because it's Carlos, you're exactly right. I think, and yes, you're right that non-technical companies have a harder time with this. And again, what I found at Walmart, quote unquote, they were milking the assets that they had bought, in some cases, 10 plus years before. So the best way to do this is with data. And the way I was able to show this is, number one, from a hardware perspective, you can show TCO, total cost of ownership of a piece of hardware, actually goes down after year 3, because you're actually consuming more power and more cooling than you are if you bought a new piece of hardware. So that's one, and that's one piece of data for things like hardware. In the software side, the way I like to show it is making sure that you're showing, back to my transparency thing, where you're sort of classifying the work that you're doing, saying, hey, this is project work, this is keep the lights on work, or technical debt work, as we call it keep the lights at Pinterest. And then you can show month over month, quarter over quarter, how much you're investing in that. And obviously, people want to invest more and more on the sort of innovation side and less on the keep the lights on side. And in our case, we were able to justify, taking a pause even on new application development for a month or a quarter in order to bring the technical debt down so that the environment would be better. The third thing is you can show areas like, we call it developer productivity, but it effectively means, are you enjoying what you do? And you can imagine in many of these cases, if you're working on a 3 versions back of some piece of hardware or software, and 5 versions back of GitHub or the we were talking about Ubuntu upgrades. I don't want to be on Ubuntu 11 anymore, right? These kind of things can make the environment a place where you have a hard time attracting talent or retaining talent. And if you can show that directly correlated to retention as well, it can help a ton. It is a challenge, but it's one that you have to keep showing data.
Awesome. I have questions coming in pools, and I apologize if I'm not able to get to every question. So the next question is, what is it like being a CTO on daily basis?
It's a funny question.
I'll add another question to it. How do you manage work-life balance, even for you and for others, your staff?
Yeah, sure. I'll answer that question. The funny thing is, I've had a number of people that have worked for me over the years leave my team and go be CTOs at other companies, which is great. It's terrible at the time, but great that you're mentoring people. And I always tell them, come back to me. I usually pretty close with most of my direct reports, and I always tell them, to set up a meeting with you. We're going to have dinner 6 months from now, and after becoming the CTO and having dinner with them, I often will ask them a question. Okay, so tell me about your week. What percentages of your time did you spend on, a technical decision, a code review, a product review, or something that has to do with the environment? Or, how many chairs should we have? HR topics of issues. What color should the, should the walls be? People don't like the snacks in the snack room and that sort of thing. And I always get just a huge amount of laughter about, the CTO role comes with both sides. And frankly, I love it when we're going into things like a deep technical review or even a day-long session for an architecture overview or planning, because it's more about what I love to do versus what I have to do. So it can be tough to balance both sides because you have a lot of, I was running a 10,000 person team at Walmart, and now my team's 1,000 at Pinterest. There's a lot of that going on, a lot of the non-technical going on. So I enjoy getting to the most technical parts as I can. The work-life balance thing has come up a lot as part of this COVID environment they're in. There has been a lot of people complaining about, it's hard to sort of know when work time is and when work time is not. I'll be a little bit facetious here that if you grew up in the IT space when I did, you were sort of on call all the time. And it's only been in the last few years that people have, sort of said, hey, that's, I'm not going to be on call, or I don't want to take an SRE role or whatever. So we were laughing about that even a few days ago. But I do agree that it's important to make sure that you have your own balance and ways to get it to communicate with you. We've talked about it at work. If I'm sending an email to one of my employees, I don't expect them to get back to me unless in the same day, if you will, and they can take 24 hours. If I'm sending a Slack, I want it to be done in the same day. And if I'm sending a text, I need it in the same hour. And so you can sort of set up boundaries with that, saying, hey, don't text stuff that isn't important, and set up boundaries with your boss in particular, but your whole team, so that you can figure out a way to do work-life balance. Over the years, I've literally been signing contracts at 11:59 on New Year's Eve when I had already had 5 beers in me and things like that. So it does come with the territory. If you're going into a technical leadership job, you're signing up for a life where you're going to be on call all the time. Whether it's an incident, an HR issue, or some last second contract you have to do, it's just part of the
job. Awesome. It's so hard to pick up questions. These are such good questions. Next question is, how do you know when it is time to leave the company you're working for and move on with your career?
Yeah, I wish I should have covered that a little bit. One of the things I was going to mention is, if you noticed on my bio page, I stayed with companies for a really long time, and I mentioned that I stayed at the first company too long, but I would say I wouldn't even start looking outside until you've been at a company 3 years. We used to say this at eBay: if we got 3 years out of somebody, it was great. And today it's just absurd. You know, many of your peers that have already graduated and have gone out, you know, are bouncing between companies. I even had a person come to me and saying, well, you know, I've been at the company for 2 years and I want to really diversify my portfolio of companies that I have. You know, they're leaving, and I'm like, well, do you like your job and the work that you're doing? And they're like, yeah, I really like it, but I really want to diversify the companies that I work for. I'm like, you know, me as a leader, I'm looking at somebody who bounces every 2 years as a downside, you know, as somebody I don't want to hire. Because really after 2 years is really when you understand how everything works. I mean, even Pinterest is a very complex environment. You know, after 2 years, you're just getting going. And frankly, I feel like you're not really gonna be able to grow in your career until you have a good handle on how the whole company works, how the systems work, and how you can effectively be a great leader. So don't even think about it until 3 years. And the only exception to that is if you have a terrible manager or leader, make sure that they probably know already that your manager is terrible. So if that experience lasts longer than, I would say, more than 6 months, then maybe you should exit. But just to be clear, most of the times when there's a leadership problem or a management problem in the company is very well aware of it, and they're working on how to make a clean exit. So if you just jump after 1 month, then I would say you're making a mistake, because the company is already working on it. I know that's kind of a ambiguous statement, but I think part of the reason I got to the executive management places I've been is because I stayed at companies longer than most.
Awesome. I'll take one last question, and again, I apologize everyone who I couldn't get to. And I can see the dean is over here. I'm gonna try to invite him to say some closing remarks. The last question that I have is: do you have any favorite books, you know, that you enjoyed reading and can give you some good advice?
I have a huge book list. I'm actually reading this one right now. Kevin Scott is a good friend of mine. It's called, I don't know if you can see. Oh, did I stop? It's called Reprogramming the American Dream. And part of the reason I like it a lot is because he's talking about the future of AI and the fact that AI isn't going to destroy jobs as it's much to be. And frankly, reading that right now will give you a good understanding of all the different industries that really need technical talent to help them. They were talking about farming equipment that now have, you know, GPS trackers and, you know, microcomputers on them to figure out how to distribute water or insecticides very accurately. And they don't have the people to help diagnose these things. And so there's just a huge amount of technical need for technical talent around the globe. And even in rural environments. So anyway, I have a whole book list. I'll send it in, and I read a lot, and that's another thing you guys should do. Put YouTube down and for a while and read a book once a week or every other week or something. There's lots of great books out there that will help you all that stuff.
That will be awesome. Actually, I'll share that list with them. Actually, there's one more good question, which I think is very, very relevant. How do you keep yourself up to date? I mean, when you graduated, none of these technologies that you're working with existed.
Yeah.
Once these guys graduate.
Well, like I said, you know, I realized pretty early in my career that I wasn't going to be the best programmer, but I was actually pretty good at architectural overviews, identifying spots or single points of failure, really articulating, you know, the basic architectural principles of scaling, which is, you know, distributed systems and the ability to do failovers and that sort of thing. I still love going into a deep dive into our teams, and I run the architecture, you know, reviews of the company of Pinterest. And these guys, you know, on the machine learning side in particular, they've gone way beyond my math capabilities. But on the data and systems side, and even on, you know, what's happening with with iOS and Android development and sharing of code, you'll see lots of patterns that have been around for a really long time that you can help contribute in. So deep technical dives, and again, lots of reading of new material. So it's a lot of work, and God, there's new stuff coming out every day. But again, that's where I really focused my life on presentation technologies and sort of the front end tier. I'm not as good as data on databases, and I'm certainly not on machine learning as many of my colleagues are. But pick an area that you're going to be an expert in, and make sure you know how it integrates with the rest.
Awesome, thank you so much. Let me see if I can, if I was able to unmute the dean. I'm not sure if I unmuted him.
You unmuted me. I'm here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey,
so,
Dan.
parting words.
I got the t-shirt memo that Jeremy and I both have subscribed to working from home today. So there you go. I got in it. SJSU. I'm wearing the bling. Anyway.
I don't think I've ever seen you not in a tie. So that's awesome.
Not in a blazer anyway. Anyway, thank you, Jeremy. Nitin, thanks for including me. I missed the first part, but one quick observation for the students in particular, which just really struck me as I was listening to the last 20, 25 minutes, is be curious. I mean, I think a lot of what you heard from Jeremy is, be intellectually curious, be curious about the people you work with. And just, I think if you do that well, obviously it's to your own benefit in terms of personal, professional growth, but it's a really strong signal to others too, and I think has a tremendous positive impact on your career. If you're somebody who says, I'm not sure I know how to do that, but right now, but let me go figure it out. That's an incredible signal to send to others. And I think one of the takeaways I got from Jeremy's comments is that was very much his MO in how he approached his career. So I want to thank you, Jeremy, for spending time. Nitin, thanks for including me. I always love listening to Jeremy talk. There's such an authentic approach to the way he shares information and things. And anyway, thank you. And you make San Jose State proud as an alum. So appreciate it.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you, guys. And I saw a couple of questions, and if you want to shoot me an email directly, jking@pinterest.com, or catch me on LinkedIn, I'd be happy to answer some more questions asynchronously. Got a lot more work to do this afternoon, but maybe over the next couple of days I'll get to them. So it was wonderful to meet y'all, and San Jose State's awesome, a place to work, place to be. It's a great and well-respected college. So congrats on your graduation, and work and get out. We'll see you in the field here soon enough.
I'm going to unmute just for a minute so that everybody can give you a round of applause.
Thank you.
Gosh, no.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
So much.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We really appreciate your time here.
Oh God, it's so. And then 3 wins in search. Fuck. And then 10 picks. Okay, that one's the only one that's like.
Why are people talking? Shut up.
All right.
Jeremy, I'll see you in the next meeting.
Sounds good. I'll be there.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Figure out how to. Oh, let me see if I can give you back.
That's fine. I'll just exit.
Maybe if I leave, it'll get back to you. Let's see.